Anything else?
A couple of nights ago, Alan, you talked about, I think it was recollection. Where or what is the place of recollection within the context of no thought? Shunyata. Is recollection always of the mind, or is there a recollection that is of the no mind?
And I'm wondering if that could dovetail into your question, madam. Which was what?
The buddhic level, as he got his own intelligence, and if
what?
His intelligence, its intelligence.
Yes, its own intelligence. Yes.
And if yes, how can he act? And if he acts, should he use, or can he use the mental level a bit to act?
Two very good questions, aren't they? I only wish I knew the answer. So if we don't know the answer, what are we to do? What is the answer? To anything, what is the answer? What is the question? Here is the question to which I do not know the answer. Where do we go from there? How do we approach anything to which we do not know the answer? How do we approach the conundrum? How do we approach the mystery? How do we approach the paradox, a parable? First, do we need to know? Do we need to know? The majority of people in this country, in other countries, in the world, would feel they did not need to know the answers to questions of that kind or questions of many kinds. Indeed, seriousness of any sort is to be avoided. It seems to me that there's a spurious seriousness. There's a sort of seriousness which is a kind of sophistication, a sort of extension of how to play bridge well or engage in other diversions, games of all kinds, things we preoccupy ourselves with. The 19th century threw up a vast amount of cults of this mystery-mongering kind, where people filled spaces in their lives. And the question has to be asked, is this just another indication of the cunning of the human mind to preoccupy itself with questions of many sorts in order to avoid facing, working with and through the really needful questions. I can think of one friend of not so long ago. Who feels, no, meditation, pranayama and so on is not what is needed. And has gone off to study ley lines. Now, ley lines may or may not be quite interesting. But is this a diversion from that which is central? I remember years ago, 1965 was it? A discussion with a man who wore medals or had medals for valour. Brave fellow. A colonel with a distinguished record. Of service, in action, goodness knows what. We were both staying as guests in a very pleasant country house just outside Hastings. And the lady of the house was quite keen to bring us together because he was very well known in the spiritualist world. And the colonel was very practiced and experienced in bestowing information about the other side. Life after death and how to communicate with the great beyond and all that. And we sort of listened with respect for some time. And all I said was, how does this relate to the essential question? And he said, what's the essential question? I said, well, surely a problem we all have. You and I and every other human being we know and see around us. What to do about this preposterous little ego, which will project from itself, whatever our good intentions, conflict and confusion, because it is in itself everlastingly in a state of conflict and confusion. Therefore, the world is in peril. Therefore, the earth is on the edge of an inferno. And what good is it, I wonder, to talk about what goes on the other side, unless we're very clear about what needs to be done in the here and now, beginning with this mess, which is me and you. That's all I said, and a few other things as well. Do you know, this valiant man wouldn't come down to breakfast the next morning. So he didn't want another discussion like that. He'd got a terrible headache. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? I was younger then, rather earnest. Used to fix them with a steady gaze. These are not questions like that. These are good questions, it seems to me. So how do we find out? What has to be done in order that we know? What is we that knows? Do we already know? Do we already know? And is the fact that we ask the good question an indication that indeed we already know? And the fact that the question has arisen as a thought form in our conscious mind, is that an indication of the prompting of a much deeper level, which throws up the question in order that the conscious mind may connect with the shaft of insight, which is energy, which is a transforming ray, in order that the conscious mind can connect with that shaft of insight that is already there. So there are two sorts of questions. There's the question of this sort. Wealthy Mrs. So-and-so, whom I met the same period in Sussex years ago, has a platform in her garden, and she invites speakers and people to come hear the speakers, and she invites swamis and others, and perhaps you would like to come and speak to us sometime. Do you know Swami so-and-so? Do you know Pandit so-and-so? Do you know the Bhikkhu so-and-so? I know them all. It's this name dropping here and all over the place. What sadhana do you follow, madam? What practice do you engage in? What is your discipline? Oh, well, I do what suits me, you know, I sort of... Do you know Swami Purnananda? Yes. When you know the Swamis, you feel you're on the inner side of things. On the inner side of things. It hasn't got much to do with hard work or facing real questions. Do you see what I mean? There is the not unhealthy preoccupation on the surface, or there is the depth question. And it's only the depth question that will yield rich fruit. Fruit that registers on every level. So how are we to find out? If we really want to know, the question will return to us. It will come unsought, unexpectedly, many times, and there will be pauses, there will be ruminations, there will be silences, there will be intervening sleep. If we really need to know, what appears to happen, maybe, is that the question needs us, because it keeps coming back. The question needs us. The question is engaging us, pursuing us, or perhaps more correctly, that guiding ray that prompts the question is an insistent presence that will not let our conscious mind go. Once our conscious mind has, however uncomprehendingly, opened itself out to a new vista, has opened the door, and there is no retreat. There is no going back. There may be periods of diversion, periods of avoidance, periods of digression, but it will not let us go. Us being the conscious level, it being the insight being. So what is to be done about the unanswerable question? And surely the response is to realize the holistic nature of the question and the answer. Of the problem and the truth. They're one. And the fact of needing to know indicates that the answer is seeking to give birth to itself within our own consciousness. So what is to be done? Essentially, if we need to know, we will know. It will happen. But we have to let it happen. We have to become that which lets it happen. Shedding preconceptions in a state of deep receptivity. That state of deep receptivity we may call meditation. If we need to know, the thought level will not solve it. The thought level can merely speculate and feed itself from itself, but not achieve insight. And insight is that which is revealed. If we are the receptive vessel, what we need to know, we shall know. Life is knocking at the door. There are not just the prompts from without, there are the hammerings, the clamourings, a whole pattern of pandemonium. But if we need to know, we have to find a space from that and let the knowledge that is the insight come into birth. So, 2 questions. Does recollection, does memory of the past have any purpose or function? And does the Buddhic level, with its insights, work independent of thought, or can it work only independently of thought? Or does it work in conjunction with thought? Let's take that one first. The Buddhic level, if we presume to make any reference to it at all, is that which happens when mind perceives space. Is that which happens, conversely, when space, the spaceless space, perceives us. Last night there was some talk about is the consciousness of God, is God conscious, and so on and so on. When that which is without limitation finds, as it were, a chink of itself between the flow of thought emotion it will flash into that space. Space will rush to fill that space. Instantaneously. When that happens, there is an enlivening of everything. Thought itself has been caused to recede. It moves further away. Space perhaps becomes one can't use the word duration because that's time. But that inner space which is not of time enlarges our capacity for spontaneous space. This is not something that can be induced, that we can make happen, but something for which we can be ready. In an inward sense, attuned. The insight might come as an energy, not as an image, not as an answer to a question, but it will enliven what is there, and there will be fruits. And among the fruits, there may be a sudden prompting that comes through the pattern of thought, is communicated to us as thought, but something quite new we hadn't known before, hadn't seen before. The flash has happened. Then arises, maybe instantaneously almost, or maybe the next day, or maybe at some odd moment, unexpectedly. Gosh, I see it. It's there. Now this has happened. This, if you like, this guidance. Because we are so attuned at a level beyond thought has revealed the energy that will induce the result. Now, if we identify the result as being some specific thought form, something we need to know, something that induces us into a certain line of action, that's an unnecessary limitation. Because that shaft of energy does not have limitation. It is, if it happens, we may discern it fragmentarily as needed information, but it is also a justification in itself, in its own self-revealing to our conscious level, that yes, there is a guiding light, and there is protection. One who has cognized this knows that not only are there steps in some degree guided, but they are protected. They may be fulminated against by this or that level of authority. And this may be disconcerting in its way, very troublesome. But there is a level that does not fear. And there is a realization that in any deeper sense, one cannot be touched. And that's one way of it. Looking at it a little further, when that energy happens, it may be thought reverberates, thought responds, and thought assumes a pattern which may be the needed information. It may be the way in which we have to communicate. Or in a wider sense still, it may be the coming into existence of our deeper, truer form of self-expression. One could be an artist in a variety of mediums. And the artist can only be enriched, the artist of any kind, can only be enriched by the sort of attunement that we are referring to. So far as, say, teaching is concerned, there is another dimension which can enable one to say, perhaps, one is not a guru, one is not a teacher. One merely seeks to share what one sees. And what happens is a flow of seeing. And when there is a gathering of empathetic interaction, that flow is the monopoly of no one individual. But because there is shared attention, because there is shared cognition, because there is shared motivation, there is a shared realization that wells up from the inner potential of all concerned. So, what was the state of consciousness of Mozart? Goodness me. There can be no doubt whatsoever. That his reactive mind could divert, and I use the word divert advisedly, into levels of frippery and nonsense, which might well have a necessary stabilizing effect on his consciousness. But when Mozart was Mozart, the truth must happen that there is the energy of Mozart, a rare and unique pouring of power into the conscious level. And doubtless an almost immediate response from the level of thought that formulates itself in the way in which it's trained to make response. Someone else could be equally well trained, equally well technically equipped, and yet the unique and devastating revelation will only happen when the nameless energy is there. Recollection presupposes recognition of the past, that the past has some sort of validity, and the past is a thought form. Indeed, a prodigious agglomeration of thought forms, carrying and generating their own energy. The past is the dark side of the earth. The past in the sense of the retained energies, the retained, repressed, subconscious energies, largely irrelevant, trapped, pent-up forces, which earth-bind our conscious being. And unless and until they are released, there is a great obstruction to growth. So the trapped, convulsive impulses of the past must be released and must die. The past must die. But traces are left. In the so-called unconscious. And if we are alive to the flow of no thought, what we need to know, as echoes from the past we shall know. Although much may have been emptied away, a trace remains. And if information or a lesson or a parable from the pictures of the past are needed, that will be thrown up. There's something else that pertains to the yogi. A yogi may become fairly advanced in meditation. the conscious mind may feel completely free of the trapped past condition. But a mystery happens. If karma so determines, relationship patterns will manifest, and there will be encounters that necessitate a descent into the remote past. In order to dredge up trapped toxic energies which belong to a shared experience. Consciousness is not individual. No man is an island. What is active in one will register in many, for good or ill. And the yogi who moves in our time will, must respond to the needs of our time and tap the trapped impulses which are revealing much that today the civilization of our time needs to face, needs to cognize, needs to know. The experts merely cloud understanding in any depth sense. The healers cannot heal in any real sense. The educators cannot educate in any real sense. The city planners cannot create an environment fit for children to be born into. It's all nonsense. Looked at historically, the past is a parable. Looked at especially in terms of the history of religion and religious literature, it's all a mass of parables, which if they come to us as something we need to find out, something unexpected, why am I preoccupied with this? Why do I suddenly want to know about this? Why will this not let me go? Because it's not a problem in itself, but through penetrating that dilemma, that parable, that teaching, an energy, a space will occur that yields an insight into what is happening in the human psyche in the here and now. If someone had said 30 years ago I would be digging into the Rig Veda, I'd have laughed at them. I hadn't the slightest interest in digging into anybody's past, certainly not the Rig Veda. All the past is nonsense, don't want to know. But when it comes and says, here's a mystery, and you say, don't want to know about that. What I'm interested in is Zen. The reality and the release of the here and now. No ideologies, no doctrines, no techniques, or as few as possible. Just the pure flow of awareness. So right. But from that standpoint, when the big issue hits you, boom, that is when you have to say, why has this problem come to me now? Many years ago, I felt impelled to undertake, in a certain way, the quest of the Holy Grail. Absolute nonsense for someone who only saw meaning in teaching of that kind. And Zen, a Gyani, who didn't want anything to do even with symbolism. Don't want to know. But if we are moving in the here and now, if we are related to the struggles, the sufferings, the questings, the evils of the civilization in which we're born, we must see meaning in experience. The experience we have now, the experience of our past personal story. It's all a parable. Your life has meaning, and your life has revelation if we can look at it through the sense of an impelling space. Then we'll see the meaning of it. If we need to know, we will know. What I'm not so happy about are those areas of psychotherapy which say, yes, dig up the past, on and on and on and on and on. Weekly visit to the psycho goes on for 10, 20 years. Nice little handout for the doc every time you go. There are a couple of folks like that, and you can retire early, can't you? I'm not knocking psychotherapy entirely. It has its place, but the way of the yogi is much, much more direct. It is to have the courage to sit and be and see and let it take possession of the problem. And it will. And it short-circuits virtually everything else. But of course, if we want to play games, and if we've got money in our pocket, it may well seem a lot less demanding to go along and see that nice Dr. So-and-so, who in extremis will give us a pill that makes us feel a bit better. But in the majority of cases, the dis-ease is here, the antidote is here, And the healing is here, nowhere else. And no therapist, no healer can hope to do more, can ever do more than give a prompt, give a little jerk perhaps, to the healing impulse that exists within our own innate psychophysical state. That healing is indivisible from the impulse for wholeness, the impulse for integration, the impulse to become one and fruitful in every way, on all levels. There's such a paradox here. To know more, we must become less. For insight to be born, we must shed all the irrelevance. When that space happens, through the conjunction of the inner needs discerned by our conscious mind and the guiding prompts of the Buddhic level, then life is truly doing something with us that has meaning, will bear fruit, will express truth of a kind, and not falsity. Let me say this. Maybe the perception has come to some of us. In a certain way, yoga is conducive to a kind of schizophrenia. Not just the blah type, something more interesting. We may well become a bit looser in the sheaths, so to speak. We might discern that there is another self. We might discern there's a curious difference between the reflexive chatter of our reactive mind and the power of our other self. Our deeper level floats around a bit, goes all over the place. Our conscious mind maybe only seldom picks it up. If we are engrossed in trivial egocentricity, our deeper being will let us be. Let the child be preoccupied with its marvels or whatever it is. But if we make the space, our deeper self, which is the fullness of our immediate potential, which has a dimension that would be astounding to our conscious mind. Our own deeper potential will happen. We will have found ourselves. More correctly, it will have found us. Our problems then do not end. If we walk the alleys and the dark corners of our civilization, definitely our problems do not end. Our responsibilities do not end. They multiply. But there is fruitfulness. There is an ever increasing response to beauty. There is an enlivening of the deeper levels of ourselves, far beyond what it can be hoped anyone can teach. It will be self-revealing. And if we are still, and if we let it happen, our eyes will see deeply. Our hearts will reveal all needed mysteries. And our lips will utter truth.